Live.
And okay, should be good.
Well, welcome everybody to our collaborative Fixing the World speaker series. Collaborations are today with California Trout, Save California Salmon, Intercept and Diversity in STEM, as well as the Native American Studies program here at Cal Poly Humboldt. So it is our honor to collaborate and bring this to you. I want to turn it over to our co-host, Regina.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Regina Chicazola. I am the co-director of Save California Salmon, and I just had a few announcements. First of all, we will be having another one of these next week, but Save California Salmon will not be participating in that one, but we will be sending out a flyer and an invite because Intercept Plus and Lonix will be having people from the Matola on next week at the same time on Wednesday. I also wanted to let people on the Klamath River here know that there will be a listening session with the Humboldt County Office of Education in Karuk Tribe at 5:30 at the Wellness Center, at the Karuk Tribe Wellness Center in Happy Camp, and snacks will be provided, and we will be talking about the Model Native American Curriculum, which is a project happening in the state of California. I also wanted to let people know that the Northern California Land Back Conference recordings are on YouTube. A lot of people are asking, and it's on our YouTube page at Save California Salmon. And we are also taking comments on the California Land Back Red Paper. You can find this on our website at californiasalmon.org/landback. There's also a donation link on our website, and that is at californiasalmon.org. And lastly, this is part of an educational project that is being done with the Cal Poly Humboldt Intercept Plus, the Native American Studies, and the Yurok Tribe. And it is part of a larger curriculum effort that is involved in our traditional ecological knowledge, science and management, and advocacy and water protection in Native California curriculums. And they are on our website at californiasalmon.org. We will be dropping all these links in the chat. And with that, I'm super excited today, as part of the Fixing the World Restoration series, to be talking about restoring Central Valley watersheds. And I think I will just pass it on for here so you can I'll pass it on here to Hilo Ramirez so he can explain today what we're doing. And then Damon Goodman from Cal Trout will also be speaking, and they will introduce themselves and take it away.
Thanks, Regina. Entanayam Nikiyam sa Hilo Nikimaa Machopto Madumdi Eskemenshewi Akun Otakameshewi. Greetings, y'all. Good day. My name's Hilo. My people are the Machupta, who are the indigenous peoples of the Butte Creek watershed and the Big Chico Creek watershed.
My name's Damon Goodman. I'm a regional director for California Trout, overseeing our operations from the Klamath down to Butte Creek. So happy to be here with Hilo and everyone else.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention I'm the environmental director for Machupta, but we're both here today to talk about salmon passage project in Big Chico Creek within Machupta's ecocultural landscape. And without further ado, I'm going to start with a presentation of my own. I'm going to quickly share my screen. So I thought it'd be important to just recognize the traditional cultural landscape where this project is taking place. I apologize if the screen is a bit small, but the Otakamsewi watershed, which is Big Chico Creek right here, and the Eskenemsewi watershed is the traditional cultural landscape of the Machupta tribe. And here you can see other names for the creeks within those watersheds. The nearest town is called Chico, which is on Big Chico Creek, Otakameshewi. All right. Even though the principal what this call is about is the Big Chico Creek Otakamsheri Restoration Project. I do think from an indigenous critical race perspective that it's important to recognize the historical activities that have led to the depletion of salmon. And that starts with the depletion of us as indigenous peoples in California. So within what is now Maidu territory, the Hudson Bay Company was depleting large amounts of game, including pronghorn antelope, elk, grizzly bear, river otters, beavers, and deer, et cetera, et cetera. And there's actually one funny, amusing entry from the Hudson Bay Company where they got trapped at the Marysville Buttes, Estom Yomani, near Yuba City, because the Butte Sink was a giant floodplain, and they were stuck there with a whole bunch of pronghorn antelope and elk, and they had no way of keeping it good. But yeah. History of Mechoopda and other California Indians. So in 1833, a disease was brought by Europeans, Anglo-Americans, and up to 75% of California Indians in the Central Valley died as a result of this epidemic. And one Hudson Bay fur trapper, J.J. Warner, with the Hudson Bay Company, had this to say about his passage through Mechoopda territory. After crossing the Feather River, those villages along the Sacramento, which in the winter previous were inhabited by hundreds of Indians, were desolate and abodes of ruin. We found the northern part of the valley strewed with the skeletons and fragments of skeletons of Indians. From the head of the valley, Redding, to the American River, Sacramento, but one living Indian was seen, and he was the most perfect personification of solitude. So not only did that deplete the population of Mechoopda and other California natives, but the state of California allowed for the slave trade of California Indians. And one such slave raid occurred within Chico. I'm not going to read this whole excerpt, but this is published in the California Star, 1847. A group of people came up to what is now Chico, and after having encountered the Mechoopda people who we offered them acorn bread and other food, they were visitors in our homeland, and we made sure that they were housed and clothed and fed. After that, they imprisoned us and shot men, women, and children who tried to escape. In total, 12 were killed, and then they were taken south to be sold at auction. The government also allowed for the legal killing of California Indians. The California had a bounty system, and roughly Anglo-Americans would be paid $5 per scalp, which in today's money is, I think, around $200 with inflation. And this act also made it illegal to do cultural burning, and there was a vagrancy clause that made it illegal simply to be a Native American unless you were able to prove that you were employed or enslaved by a white person. And in our area in particular, there was pressure to eliminate us. The Chico Weekly Current, which was the City of Chico newspaper, had this to say in 1865 about Mechoopda. Nothing but extermination will prevent them from committing their depredations. It is a false notion of humanity to save the lives of these red devils. There should be no prisoners taken, but a general sacrifice made of the whole race. They are of no benefit to themselves or mankind. Let there be a crusade, and every man that can carry and shoot a gun, turn out and hunt the red devils to their holes and there bury them, leaving not a root or branch of them remaining. So at the same time that the salmon and the elk and pronghorn antelope are being depleted, so are we as California Indians. And there were many bounty incidents that happened in Chico. This one was recorded in 1863, and a party of whites killed 3 Indians, Mechoopda, 7 or 8 miles above that place. If you go up 7 or 8 miles along Big Chico Creek, that's the site of our project. So within the vicinity of our project site to save the salmon was also the site of this massacre. And here's another one where 17 Indians, it says 17 Indians, so this happened in Chico. So it'd be Mechoopda, they were killed for their scalps, and then they were sold in Marysville. Another incident and another incident. So these incidents were wide-ranging, and they occurred throughout California. So it isn't just a Mechoopda experience, but I wanted to focus on Mechoopda since that's my people, and this is where this project's taking place. I'm gonna quickly just kind of skip over all of this historical good information to focus on salmon. So after 100 years or so of colonization, assimilation, and genocide, there was the Rancheria system. And by this time in 1967, our Rancheria in Chico was terminated and given, half of it was sold to Chico State and half of it was sold to, that's Chico State University, and half of it was sold to the city of Chico. And at the same time that we lost our federal recognition and had our reservation taken from us, California Department of Fish and Game in 1967 published this paper. And it says 5 species of salmon in the Sacramento River, California. I want to mention this because it mentions king salmon, which we now call Chinook salmon, are abundant in the Sacramento San Joaquin River system, but other species of salmon are uncommon or rare. So approximately, what would that be, about 70, 60 years ago, there were more than one species of salmon in the Sacramento watershed. Historically, our oral history tells us as Mechoopda that there were more than one species. It wasn't just Chinook. So at this time in 1967, California Department of Fish and Game was raising the alarm that these other species of salmon, such as coho, were going extinct. And they described Chinook salmon as abundant. Fast forward to today, none of those other species exist in the Sacramento watershed anymore, except for Chinook. And 2 of their runs are listed as endangered. They're listed. So I just bring this up because of shifting baselines. From our baseline as Indigenous peoples, we have our oral history that tells us that 4 times a year, multiple species of salmon would come up Big Chico Creek. And Big Chico Creek would be so abundant in salmon that you'd be able to walk across their backs like a bridge. And today, we're lucky to see a dozen or so salmon in Big Chico Creek. And here's a nice picture of some Chico residents, non-native, that were fishing in Big Chico Creek, which is now downtown Chico, for salmon. And this is taken around 1920. All right. I'm going to stop sharing there. And then we'll yield my time to Damon, who can talk about the specifics of our project and what is now Bidwell Park.
Get that presentation.
Yeah. Just tell me when you want me to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, thanks so much for that, Hilo. That lays a foundation for the work that we're doing here, and is a real important component of what is I see a guiding light for how we approach the restoration of Big Chico Creek, and just adds a lot of depth and importance to this project. As I said before, my name is Damon Goodman. I'm a regional director that oversees this project for California Trout. I also want to recognize Holly Swan, who is our project manager for the Mount Lassen region and located here in Chico. This is an image taken looking down over Big Chico Creek. For those of you that have not been here before, this is just a gorgeous place to spend time. Upper Bidwell Park is the playground of Chico. Lots of recreational visitors, a great place to spend time and enjoy the river. And as this is looking downstream over the project site, and you can see Chico there in the distance on the horizon. If you want to, there you go. So here I've brought forward some historical distribution information for anadromous fish in the Sacramento watershed. And I'd like to highlight a couple runs of Chinook salmon that are of particular interest that Hilo mentioned before. Winter run and spring run, both of these are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act currently. And both of these are runs of fish that use upper extents of watersheds. They migrate up in the winter and spring, and then actually hold and spawn through the, for winter run, they spawn in the summer. Actually, it's really interesting, and they've evolved to spring fed systems that come off of Mount Shasta and Mount Lassen, where spring run migrate up and hold through the summer in deep pool high up in watersheds. And so those are runs that really require access to kind of higher up in the watersheds to have success in that life history strategy. Steelhead are an anadromous rainbow trout, and these are some of the most athletic salmonids around, and they can leap really high distances, and they're just famous for making it higher up in watersheds than Chinook and other anadromous salmon. And then we have Pacific lamprey. These fish have evolved to be able to climb up and over waterfalls, and so they really define the upper extent of historical distribution in these anadromous watersheds. And when you total all this up, just for the Sacramento Basin, we have something like 3,800 miles of anadromous habitat. And just to put that in context, so like what is 3,800 miles? Well, if you hopped in your car and drove to Maine, you're still not at 3,800 miles. And so that's the extent of what historical anadromous habitat was in the Sacramento Valley watershed. And this, I'll also say, this is kind of a curtailed version. We're just looking at the larger streams. If you add up all the smaller streams, it goes on and on. So, and go to the next slide, please. Well, if you look what's happened since around the 1950s, 1960s, about half of that habitat has been lost. And this is due to construction of large dams. And so this is one of the primary threats facing anadromous fish in the Sacramento and actually throughout California. Next. So I'll talk about a little bit about how I became engaged in this project. And this is actually an image from the day that happened. So I was in Big Chico Creek surveying its fishes, and quickly realized, myself and Stuart Reed were up surveying for fish, and quickly realized that we were missing large components of the fish fauna of the creek. And you look around and it's beautiful habitat. And in fact, like really high quality habitat, beautiful flow even in the middle of a summer during a drought, cool temperatures, all the things the fish wants, but yet we're missing quite a few of our fishes. And then I had to hike back to the car because I forgot my camera or something. I wanted to take a picture of the habitat. And who did I stumble into? It's this guy here on the left, Paul Maslin. And I didn't know who he was at the time. And here we are in this kind of remote spot in a creek, and started a conversation. He's like, well, what do you do? He saw me in my boots with a fish hand net for fish. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, started talking about collecting fish, and we engaged in this conversation, and right away that I figured out this guy knows a lot about fish. And I said, well, who are you? And he's like, I'm Dr. Paul Maslin. I spent my career studying the fishes of Big Chico Creek as a professor at Chico State University. So I took him down to the creek and showed him what we were catching. We were catching Pacific lampreys, and they were actually one of the few fish in that section of creek that actually the only anadromous fish that makes it up there, and that's because of their ability to climb. And so we were celebrating finding those fish there. And he filled me in on a history of Big Chico Creek that we'll talk about here, and that a large proportion of the fish of Big Chico Creek are no longer there. And that's because of what was at the time best management practices. Went through and applied this chemical called rotenone.
The next one?
No, this is okay. Rotenone to rid a section of creek of native fishes because there was a thought of competition with salmon. And anyway, it was the best management practice at the time, but now we've learned that these fish all work together in ecosystems, and there's an important component there of all the fishes working together to create a healthy ecosystem. Next slide. Very soon thereafter, I bumped into this guy, and just was really just so interested in the background of his understanding, he and Kyle, of the creek and the history of this section of river being used as a subsistence fishery for the tribe and all the elements of that, and just really provided a foundation for understanding the history of the land here, and then helping us craft a way forward, an approach to well, how do we get back, in that direction or towards restoration. Next slide. So here we are in Big Chico Creek. This is our project site, Iron Canyon. And at that site, there's a spot where a earthquake had happened. Some boulders fell in, blocking passage for what was historically accessible to anadromous steelhead and spring run Chinook. And that's our project site there. And then we have 8.5 miles of habitat from that upper Bidwell Park, which is all basically preserved in really good condition, into the ecological reserve, which all that's being done there is improving the habitat and preserving it. And then there's some private landowners up top that are taking really good care of their land too. And so this is a really prime section of habitat for our fish that they are not able to access right now. And next slide. So here's that fishway that I'm talking about. And so when that earthquake happened, this has been recognized for a long time as something that we wanted to provide passage by, right? And so since the 1940s, people have been going down 250 feet, vertical feet down into this gorge and building steps up this section of creek. And inevitably these, little structures get buried with rocks and destroyed, and then you have to like rappel back down in there to try and fix them, and that happens over and over and over, and eventually folks have just given up on that, right? And so we have this dilapidated fishway that no longer works. Here's a picture of Eli there, the director of the ecological reserve, giving the thumbs up that we need to replace this thing. Some of those steps are several feet tall and they're a challenge, but then there's some that are just completely gone. And then we have that whole rotenone treatment that above there, even if there was access, some of these resident fish that were removed from that section would have really hard time or haven't been able to recolonize since that treatment that, most recently happened back in the 80s. So that's about the time frame of that kind of treatment that happened there. Next slide.
If you don't mind, I'd like to add one more thing.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Please help.
So a little more history about this salmon ladder. A study was commissioned in the early 2000s, I think around 2004, to see the viability of anadromous passage through this 50, 60, 70-year-old fish ladder. And it found that in low water years, it was impassable for anadromous fishes. And it's so essentially, other than 2023 and 2017, that's practically every year for the last 20 years. So it's non-functional, and concrete has a lifespan about 50 years. So it's just crumbling away. And this passage in particular is preventing anadromous salmonids from reaching those colder, more oxygen-rich waters in the upper watershed, which is now the BSER and private landowners. And then this rotenone, I know that Damon talked a wee bit about it, but this happened in the 1980s. And the thought process was, if we kill every single fish species other than salmon, and then reintroduce that salmon and trout, it'll be incredibly good salmon and trout fishing. However, the rotenone, the fish killer, it killed all the species in Big Chico Creek, and then there was a huge decrease in the benthic macroinvertebrates, water bugs, which the trout and such feed on, and it completely destroyed the ecosystem and food web. So when the government tried to reintroduce salmonids without those other fish species, the ecosystem, that food web didn't exist, and it was disastrous. And the fish populations haven't recovered since the 1980s.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for adding that. That's super helpful. And this is just a small section of the fishway too. This is just an example of it. It's much more extensive than that. So because of the work of Dr. Paul Maslin, his students, Hilo, the Mechoopda tribe's knowledge, these are the species that made up Big Chico Creek when there was access. at the fishway and before the rotenone treatment. And you can see this assemblage of fish, and each of them play a role in that ecosystem. And some of those interactions, we still don't even understand the importance of them, right? We're still just figuring that out. But you know, I'll give one example with Pacific lamprey. That's a species that I've studied fairly extensively, and one of the benefits that they provide is they're spring spawners, right? And so they create redds in the spring. And when they build their redds, they use their mouth, their sucker mouth, to move rocks, and they make these little kind of fire ring pits in the bed. And so you have them kind of digging up the bed and recontouring, engineering in a way, the riverbed, right? And so what does that do? Well, what that does is increases the diversity of the bathymetry of the river bottom, right? And adds different surface profiles, creates feeding spots for other fishes, creates habitat for different water bugs or macroinvertebrates, and becomes a hotspot of different species to use for feeding lanes, for velocity refuge, all the things. And so that's just one example of how these fish work together. They also bring marine derived nutrients from the ocean up into the stream, and after they spawn, they die, and then that is, you know, brought back into the stream, brought to the stream, and fuels the food web that way. So on it goes. And so this is, we have a template from that information. We have a template of what historically was there. And if you fast forward to the next slide, these are the species that are essentially gone from that reach now, from the rotenone and issues with the fish passage. And those species that still exist up there are persisting in lower abundance than what we saw previously as well. And so our approach to this isn't just to focus on Chinook salmon or steelhead, but really focusing on recreating this full ecosystem, you know, and bringing that back to Big Chico Creek. And, you know, I'm a fish biologist. That's my face is always in the creek, but for those folks that look outside, you know, of the creek, there's all these species that relied on these fish in that section of creek that we've seen decline too. And that includes, you know, raptors, you know, osprey. Hilo, help me here. What else do we see there?
Osprey, there is bald eagle and golden eagles that are known to nest there. And then even looking at non-animal species, these anadromous species, the lamprey, the salmon, other salmonids such as steelhead, they're bringing all these nutrients that are accumulated from the ocean coming up to here in the upper watershed. They're going to breed and then die, and then they're depositing all that fertilizer onto the banks, which then helps our other species like the oak trees, the valley oak, the lowie, the chocowie, also known as blue oak, and it's helping them grow big and strong, and it's improving our cultural floral species that we need to gather from our acorns, our waihi, our Indian potatoes, so that they have enough nutrients to grow abundantly and increase biodiversity of the flora. So it's much bigger than just the Chinook. It has these, I love these interactions. They're going to the ocean, they're accumulating all this nitrogen, they're depositing all that nitrogen into the banks, and then it helps the oak trees and other riparian tree species and shrubs proliferate, and then they're providing shade to the salmon and improving their habitat so they can hold in these holding areas like the Chinook, the spring run need to do all summer long until they finally copulate in the fall. So this project is taking a holistic approach to salmon restoration and other species.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, next slide. Let's move on. So this whole fish passage thing is not a new problem, right? And there's all kind of creative solutions that have been tried to there's been all kinds of creative solutions applied to try and resolve it. And so one of my favorite examples from Chico is this, that Galen Taylor, he's still involved. He's one of our project partners here. He's still involved. A lot of these people that you see here, Tracy and Alan, are all part of our working group here on the creek. But they organized, led by Galen, they said, hey, these salmon, when they get stuck below this fishway, it's not a good place for them. They have a very low chance of survival, low chance of success making it to spawning. And so Galen recognized that. This guy calls in the helicopters. He said, we have some fish to rescue. They call in the helicopters. This is in 1998. So they actually had that on that top left, that's a bucket full of fish where they would actually load these fish into that bucket and helicopter them over that fishway and drop them into the creek above to try and save them. And, you know, this is the extent that people are trying to save these fish. So amazing. We're looking for a more permanent solution, but it's great to recognize all the efforts through the past to try and do this. So here's the approach. You know, basically what we're trying to do is restore anadromy. And this is a picture of the project site from a different angle. Looking at that boulder cluster, you know, that's basically impassable at all except for the most extreme conditions with high flows. We want to restore anadromy so those migratory fish can make it easily upstream of that to that ecological reserve. We also want to reestablish the native fish community. And so that may actually require some translocation of those fishes from other places to bring them up there because they may not be able to get up there on their own, and they haven't been able to since the 1980s. And then there's a big community engagement component of this. You know, we're trying to reinforce the existing educational system that connects the community to the environment. We're expecting something like 1,400 students a year to come and engage in this restoration project and learn from it and be part of that. And this project has actually become what I see as a model for accelerating restoration. And that's because there's a number of permitting efficiencies that have been recently passed. You may hear it as called cutting the green tape. Working with our friends there at Sustainable Conservation, there's been all kinds of ways, new avenues made to make getting restoration on the ground more efficient. And, you know, with this project alone, we're looking at 1.5 years savings of time from getting this from concept to construction. And that's something like a $250,000 savings just on this one project alone from those efficiencies. So we're really happy to be able to benefit from that work. We're also approaching this as a design build project. So with one grant, we're taking this project from concept to construction. So in past projects, we've had something like 9 different grants to get through that process. Because of what's going on right now with funding for work like this, we're able to get one grant to do that. And we were recently awarded the NOAA infrastructure grant earlier this year to do that. So we're on track right now, guys. And here's on the top left, you can see those people standing on the edge. That's our working group. That's how we formulate our plans on how to move forward. And so that's how we get together to think about solving this problem. So we have experience doing this type of project in other places, and this is an example of a neighboring drainage, Battle Creek, actually home to, you know, historical habitat for winter run Chinook. And this is another spot where the winter run were no longer able to access their historical habitats. This you know, blockage stopped them from making it there. And so we developed an approach, working with our partners, we developed an approach to resolve that, to remedy that. And so this is the largest fish passage project done for winter run Chinook, and this was completed about a year ago. And and this is a before construction image. And what we try and do is take a section of creek like this that looks like this and turn it into a section of creek that's modeled after other sections in that river that are passable by fish. And so I'll give you an example of how we do this. So in this instance, we brought in this crane. It's something like a 300-foot tall crane, and we move those boulders and rebuild that riverbed to make it passable by all fishes, not just Chinook, not just steelhead, but for all the fishes that would use that as a migratory corridor. Next slide. And here's what that same spot looks like after construction. And that was completed in 2022. We removed something like 3.6 million tons of rock. That's about the weight of General Sherman, if you want to kind of compare that to something else. So, and this is what it looks like after, and this is something that we expect to have very little maintenance associated with it. It's all native material. There's no metal, there's no concrete. It's built like a riverbed and able to act like that with different flow regimes. And so we see this as a much more sustainable approach to providing fish passage, and a model for how we'll approach Big Chico Creek. And so, this is, this project, there's so many different agencies, individuals that come together to make a project like this a success. And if I were to list all these individuals as co-authors on this presentation, I couldn't fit them all on a slide. So, here's all the different collaborating agencies and entities that are part of making this a success. And we're all doing what we can to push us forward. And California Trout just acts as a catalyst to facilitate this collaboration and what will lead to successful fish passage. In less than 5 years, we'll have anadromous fish back to the top of Big Chico Creek.
And then I just wanted to add real quick back to here.
Yeah.
So the gist is with Big Chico Creek, we're going to do something very similar here that was done on Battle Creek.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to fix the broken fish ladder in Big Chico Creek, we're going to disregard that fish ladder entirely, and we're just going to remove the fish passage barriers that are in the creek using expanding foam. So essentially, modern way of doing how things were done 3,000 years ago by civilizations throughout history. Drill some holes in the big things, and then put the expanding foam into all those holes that are like in a line. And then that expanding foam cracks the rock, makes one big rock into smaller rocks, and then use that crane to pull it out. This approach is different than what was suggested about 20 years ago, where 20 years ago it was thought that either one, the fish ladder should be reconstructed, so remake it out of concrete, and then have to deal with this 50 years in the future, remaking and upgrading the fish ladder, or blow it up with dynamite. This project won't use any dynamite. It'll just use that expanding foam, which will gently break them into smaller pieces.
Yeah. That's great. And when we're done with construction, like at Battle Creek, when you look at that site after construction, without the trained eye, you would not know there was ever a construction project. You know what I mean? It's not looking like big concrete blocks or, this looks like a river. And I think that's really important too. Especially in a place like Bidwell Park, to preserve the aesthetics and experience of people that enjoy that place. There's a couple more. There's just a couple more slides. Sorry, guys.
My bad.
We're almost there. All right. So this is an example of Big Chico Creek Working Group and that collaboration. And what I discussed, this is how we meet. We come to the bank of the river, we get around in a circle, and everybody brings their expertise and what they can contribute to that process. And each of these individuals represents one of those agencies, right? But really it's these individuals that are coming together to make a difference here. And you can see Dr. Paul Maslin there helping guide us through the conversation of the native fish fauna, and Kyle McHenry in the back from the Bachupta tribe. But really, everybody's coming together and representing different elements of what they can provide to solving this problem. And that's how we're going to be successful here is with everybody bringing that collaboration and that support to this process. And this this project would not be where it's at right now without the work of Holly Swan, which is our local project manager, and she's part of the glue that holds this whole process together, right? And so there she is on the bank of Butte Creek, which is another spot we collaborate with the Mechoopda on conservation, but she's a huge part of making this all happen and making this a success. And she is we opened a new office here in Chico, and she's the representative there. So please reach out whenever you're in town and have a conversation. And one more slide. One thing I wanted to bring up, the Native Fish Committee from American Fisheries Society has taken note of this, and we're bringing together native fish experts from across California and Nevada to have conversations about the approach that we're taking here, how we can refine it, how we can take it to other places, to share that with other areas throughout those California and Nevada. And so feel free to reach out if you'd like to participate and join that conversation. But that's the end of it. So
Well, that was wonderful. What a lesson, all compact in that condensed way that you did. That was awesome. So I have a ton of questions. So I'm going to start in. That's the privilege of being one of the co-hosts. I get to ask my questions.
all right.
So, if we people of the Klamath Basin, which includes the Trinity branch, and there are reservoirs that then pump water over into the San Joaquin Valley. So we've had some politicians advocate for sending more water over the hill into the Sacramento River to, quote, help the Sacramento fish. I think there were ulterior motives that weren't necessarily spoken to. It was sold as to help the Sacramento system fish. Could you two provide any insight to how that may make sense or may not make sense? What the heck is all that from your perspectives?
You want to take a stab at this? I love this question.
So I will state, I'm more of a general ecologist and botanist, so this is a political question, and I don't want to say anything too political where I'll get a call next week. But just from my perspective as a private citizen, my private personal thoughts on that would be that possibly the government wants to put more water into the Sacramento watershed, so then there's more water available to then send for ag.
Yeah, I would say I see that a lot. This is a question maybe within my realm as someone who deals with the Trinity diversion into the Sacramento and both systems a lot. But I do see that a lot. The state water board proposes that a lot and does leave the Trinity out of like temperature management plans for the Sacramento, and then says that they need that Trinity water to divert into the Sacramento for temperature reasons. But the diversions into Whiskey Town actually makes that water so hot that by the time it reaches the Sacramento, it actually is warm. And is bad for fish. And usually it's comes in the time of year like midsummer, where it's not as helpful for a lot of migrating fish. So I would say, a lot of the people we see push for that is like Westlands Irrigation District is always using the Endangered Species Act to try to get more Trinity water into the Sacramento, for instance. And it's hard to believe that they actually have the best interest of the salmon in mind, being that they're kind of Darth Vader of California water. So I would say that that is usually not a very sincere or reasonable request.
Shenanigans. That's what it is. It's shenanigans.
So
did you have another question, Regina? Because I definitely got a bunch more.
Well, just one thing to add to that before we move on is that Big Chico Creek does not have a dam, does not have an interbasin transfer. That's a natural flow regime, right? And so we're working with something special there. Like so many of our rivers have been modified, and we're dealing with these highly modified interbasin transfers, like temperature regimes from dams, like really complicated stuff we're trying to engineer for these fish. Big Chico Creek doesn't have that, it's special for that because it does have a natural flow regime. Anyway, just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Well, go ahead, Regina.
Oh yeah, I was going to say another thing that I think that people don't understand very much, especially over here on the Klamath side, is that a lot of the Sacramento tributaries, especially the east side tributaries, are actually really cold water, like colder than the Klamath, maybe not colder than like the Trinity Reservoir before all the diversions, but there's a lot of really good east side water and habitat. There's just been so many dams and flow modifications that cold water isn't used in the way that it should be.
Yeah, and then just piggybacking off what you said, Regina. So like I mentioned earlier, my people are from the Big Chico Creek watershed and the Butte Creek watershed. And on Butte Creek, there is a series of dams that are owned by PG&E and such, and they prevent the salmon from reaching that cold water in the upper watershed. So they hold in the lower foothill valley area where a couple years ago we had a salmon kill, approximately 20,000 salmon came up for the spring run, and of that 20,000, over 99% died before they could spawn because the water temperatures in stream were about 80 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer, and dissolved oxygen levels were extremely low as a result of those high water temperatures. So those issues of just accessing that really cold water that would be incredibly beneficial and great salmon habitat is just kind of common theme in the Sierras.
So along the lines of this whole water diversion shenanigans, I'll call them, what about the aspect of perhaps some of our Klamath Basin fish would be confused by those scents coming down the Sacramento? You have any thoughts on that?
By that Klamath water?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's confusing to me too. Even the fish biologists in the Sacramento, sometimes it's hard to know which way the water's flowing because it's not necessarily following the patterns of a natural river system, right? And so it's confusing to me. I'm sure it's confusing to the fish too.
Gotcha. So through some of the work that I was exposed to, done by some of the Winnemem Wintu folks, it was the Dancing the Salmon Home. So learning about I'll call it potential brood stock that is thriving in New Zealand from the Sacramento system. And I believe we're talking Chinook in this case, as we are talking about repopulating the systems that you two are presenting on. Are there ecotypes, similar ecotypes, or that exact ecotype that exists in other systems that could perhaps be our brood stock to have those genetics that are unique to that system?
I'll take a stab at this one. So currently there is a very, very small run, as I mentioned earlier, in Big Chico Creek, like a dozen or so salmon, which may just be strays from Butte Creek. But if that's the case, then there is the Butte Creek population that would be very similar. And Butte Creek and Big Chico Creek run parallel to one another up the mountain. So they're only like a mile or two away in distance. So that's what I would say to that. And then if you can't get Butte Creek, because Butte Creek, it has the largest spring run Chinook salmon run, but it's also an endangered run. If that ain't possible, then Feather River would be the best nearest ecotype to translocate, in my opinion, from there and then repopulate Big Chico Creek.
And from your perspective, then those salmon that are thriving in New Zealand are more distant in ecotype.
I'm not too familiar with the New Zealand salmon, so.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so one thing we see in Big Chico Creek is and the Sacramento tributaries fish stray, right? Like they're not, it's this homing thing isn't 100%, right? So fish do come in and try. They are trying. That's good for us to see, is like, hey, these fish are basically knocking at the door. They want to get there, but they just can't, right? And so it's our expectation, especially with the anadromous fish, that once we provide that access, they're going to be able to do this themselves. This is going to be a natural process of recolonization. The fecundity of these fish is really high. So once they do go up there and spawn, they have great rearing habitat conditions, easy migration downstream in the creek. We think that process will happen naturally. We'll be watching it, right? And if it doesn't, we can intervene. But I think that's one that we can allow the fish to solve that problem themselves here.
Yeah.
So
Thanks,
I don't-
Damon. Yeah,
right.
I didn't make that apparent. It's that strain is an important life history trait. It's how they colonize new waters. And
Yeah, right. Yeah. When we get out of the way of these fish, they have a way of solving the problem themselves. We just need to give them a way to be able to do that, right?
Regina, you want to handle that question in the chat right after I ask this one? And
Love it.
So I've definitely recognized in the Klamath Basin how where the dams were and then no longer having those species and then some of the loss of the species such as the suckers and things go away or go away to an extent to where they're not our Aboriginal subsistence foods. I've noticed the change in culture. So I know the genocidal attempt was pretty rigorous in your region. Do you have any thoughts on how that cultural shift has played out from your perspective in now not having those species for our people?
yeah. So we're people of acorns and salmon, just like many California natives, and we're intimately tied to them. So with the loss of them, we also lose a part of ourselves. But also this project, as I've said, there have been massacres that happened within a 1 mile radius, if not at the exact site of this project. So as we're revitalizing this stream, we're doing ecological restoration, we're saving the salmon, we're also revitalizing our culture. We're also being able to be more in touch with our land. We were taken off the land and we were forbidden from actually stewarding it. But an important part of this project, which we forgot to touch on, is that as a project partner, the Mechoopda tribe will actually be doing pre-TEK traditional ecological site restoration before construction begins. We're going to go and we're going to gather all those Wai Indian potatoes, gather and transplant culturally important plants that are native to that area. And then after construction activities are finished, we're going to go back and take those same genotypes and then replant them and do TEK informed restoration. So that I think is an important part of intergenerational healing from intergenerational trauma.
Right. Excellent. Regina?
Thank you. So we have a question in the chat, and if you don't know the answer because it's on a watershed that's outside of this area, feel free to say that. But the question is I wonder what the status of fish populations are on the Feather River. Does the Oroville Dam have a fish ladder?
Oh, yeah, I can talk about that. Again, they're going to be lower than historical norms, but what they do at the Feather River is at this same location, just at this interface of the valley and the foothills, there's this large dam, and I believe the Oroville Dam is the largest earthen dam in the United States, if I'm not wrong. And they don't have a fish ladder that allows them to go past that dam. What they do is they have a fish ladder that leads to a fish kill site. So what they do is there's a fish ladder and they divert them away to this like fishery station. And then the fish jump into this little pool and there's people at the hatchery whose job is to hit them on the head with a hammer, kill them, extract either the semen or the eggs, and then they raise them in a hatchery there and then take them. And then once I'm kind of going over simplifying this, but once they grow into little babies like this, then they put them back in the Feather River so that they're able to go back downstream and complete their life history. But there isn't a natural way for them to access the upper Feather River watershed because there is no infrastructure in place at the dam to allow them to just go past the dam and do what they should do normally, which means that our brothers and sisters, the mountain Maidu, they have zero access to salmon because those interfaces, the foothill valley interfaces where all these dams are. So it means that none of them are able to go up to their territory, which historically would have happened near Lake Amonor, Lassen County, Susanville, that area.
Yeah, I do think to add on to that, the Department of Water Resources dams, and the same is true in like Washington with Bonneville Power Administration, because they are publicly owned dams, they're actually harder to get fish passage than a privately owned dam because you don't have to go through the FERC process. And the FERC process actually does have rules on fish ladders and reviewing fish ladders and things of that nature. Which is really frustrating because then also they don't really like look at the economics and all of those different situations. So you wouldn't think that's true, that private dams are actually easier in a way to get like fish ladders and environmental mitigation, but it is true, like California's dams like a lot of times don't have fish ladders.
So I noticed a follow-up in regards to this topic. Are climate change models being considered when making these plans? That's part of the question. And how has the recent historic drought and then the unprecedented rain levels this year affected the work that you all are doing?
Yeah, actually, climate change is actually one of the projections of water temperatures with climate change is one of the parts that are informing this project. And the projections show that even with climate change, as long as we're able to reach those upper reaches, if I'm not wrong, there's still the water temperatures and dissolved oxygen levels and all that still going to be within range. So it's just getting them past that hurdle with no action taken. If they're stuck in this valley foothill zone and holding there, then they will actually die through climate change. So this project, informed through climate change, will address those issues.
So I have some questions about some of the specifics in our system. So in our, particularly here on the coast, the Eel River Basin, there has been the pike minnow introduced, and that has kind of wreaked havoc on our salmonid recoveries. So I'm wondering if you guys can speak to kind of that balance of the ecosystem and the pike minnow's role in your system, where it belongs.
I'll take a stab at this and then let you fill in where I'm not able to fill in. Absolutely. But essentially from a pike minnow here are native and they're an important part of the food web. And essentially what went wrong with oversimplification, but one of the major things that went wrong with the government's efforts in the 1980s to improve salmon fishing is they didn't take into consideration if the only fish within Big Chico Creek are salmonids, those are the only fish that the golden eagles, the bald eagles, the ospreys are going to eat. So the pike minnows and other native fishes are actually important because it allows, they're not the sole target. Chinook are the sole target for predation. It's those other fish that are also being predated, which reduces stress, predation stress on the salmonids.
Did you have something to add to that, Damon?
You know, the Sacramento pike minnow, the Chinook, the steelhead have been friends for a long time, right? They evolved together in the system at the times that Hilo is talking about, where we were able to use salmon as a bridge. The pike minnow were there alongside them. So
and I think the same can be said about the Pacific lamprey and the brook lamprey in your systems, to adding to the goodness that can come out of the river, that relaxes some of the pressure on our salmonid species as well.
I think sometimes we like to use other fish as scapegoats for the real problems, right? And so let's take the pressure off of our other native fish species and put them on the things that are the root of this. So
shenanigans and other misguided doings. So that brings us kind of to a closing thing, and you all are demonstrating it with your collaborative and what you're doing in your communities. But I would like you to one final time kind of speak to, it's humanity's responsibility to take care of our planet, to take care of our earth. If you all would please reiterate that connection, that importance. This is what our human role is. If you could please touch back on that, which you've already covered pretty well, but let's end on that note on how it takes all of us. What do you all have to say about that?
Yeah, from an ecocultural traditional perspective. So in the Mechoopda belief system cosmology, we believe that the universe was created near Chico, near Durham. And that when the creator created the world and put us here, we were put here to manage and steward the lands, the waters, our fish kin, our deer kin, et cetera, et cetera. So our purpose, one of our main purposes on this earth is to manage the land and take care of our non-human relations, relatives. So we did this since time immemorial. We believe that the world was created here. So we've been here since the beginning of time. And we've been doing this for a very long time. And within the last 150 years or so, since colonization of California, we were, since time immemorial for thousands of years, an important part of the ecosystem, just like salmon are a keystone species. We as a species were an important keystone species in managing the lands and making sure everything was right in the world. And with that, us being removed from the ecosystem has had devastating effects on that ecosystem. We weren't allowed to do cultural burning. So now we have all these mega fires. We're allowed to take care of the salmon and do TEK on our cultural resources, such as Indian potatoes, and propagate them and such. And now we're seeing losses in biodiversity. There's a famous California impressionist artist from like the 1850s, and he drew these beautiful landscapes throughout California, and all of the rolling hills and all this stuff had beautiful flowers, and botanists have been able to go and actually identify all the species. And California, it wasn't like in my area in the Sacramento Valley. Now during summer, you just go and look and it's all dead grass and it's all just yellow. But back in the day, it would have been purples and blues and all these different vibrant colors. And it's a direct result of us directly managing the land. So I think management projects, restoration projects such as this, that from the beginning, contact the local indigenous peoples and have them be a keystone of that project is very vital for this project and other projects in the future.
Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today and for touching on this in such an awesome way. I just one last reminder, next week, Intercept will be continuing this theme of restoration and fixing our world. It's been an honor to partner with Save California Salmon, the Yurok tribe, Machukta tribe, as well as California Trout, the NAS department, and perhaps others. And I just one last reminder that HSU's California Big Time will be right here this weekend. We will start at 10:30. Regina, I'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Yeah, also Save California Salmon is announcing our youth internships this week. You can find all of our curriculum on our website at californiasalmon.org. All these videos are posted on our YouTube afterwards at Save California Salmon. And then after next week, we'll be picking it back up from Lonix, and we'll be talking floodplain restoration, toolies, and hopefully we'll get back to the Eel River before we end. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Hilo and Damon, and we hope to see you again next week.